There is no such thing as a perfect weapon. Even the best can be improved. The AK is considered by many to be the most prolific and reliable fighting rifle in the world. But while it's certainly a formidable weapon, it's not perfect. There have been many attempts to improve on the Kalashnikov design, and there's one that's likely been the most successful out of all of these projects. Of course, I'm talking about the Galil Ace. Though it shares a lot in common with the AK, the story of the Galil starts with the antithesis of the Kalashnikov. In the late 1950s, the Israeli Defense Force had adopted the FN-FAL as their main service weapon. The FAL was generally considered a good weapon, having been adopted by numerous militaries worldwide. However, Israeli soldiers began to notice that the FAL appeared to malfunction because of sand and dust. While these failures may have been more of a result of insufficient maintenance, there was nevertheless the perception that the FAL needed to be replaced. So, the Israeli Defense Force began looking for a new rifle. Initially, they considered the AK as a potential replacement. Soldiers in the IDF noticed that their enemies equipped with AKs did not seem to have nearly as many malfunctions as their FALs. In fact, some soldiers discarded their issued FALs for captured AKs. But as with many government contracts, logistics was a large hurdle. Importing the Kalashnikov and ammunition into Israel was too great of a logistical problem. So, the IDF began looking for a rifle that would provide the benefits of an AK, and perhaps improve on the legendary weapon. Eventually, the weapon that would be selected as Israel's new service rifle was the Galil. Adopted in 1972, it was a weapon intended to take the best traits of the AK and adapt it for the 5.56 round. But while it was the official service rifle of the IDF, there were a number of factors that limited its use by the IDF. The Galil was a very expensive weapon to produce, and beginning in 1975, the Americans began providing the IDF with surplus M16A1s at a low cost. For the Israelis, this was a much more cost-efficient method of upgrading their soldiers' rifles, and it certainly helped that a significant number of soldiers preferred the M16 over the Galil. When the M4 carbine became available for purchase to the IDF, it quickly became an even more popular option. By the year 2000, the Galil had almost been entirely replaced by either M16s or M4s. If the Galil was to stay relevant in the 21st century, it would need a serious redesign. So, that's exactly what happened, with Israeli firearms manufacturer Israel Weapons Industries taking on the task. One of the primary complaints about the original Galil was its weight. A hefty maximum of 10 pounds depending on the model, the Galil was certainly not a light rifle. So, one of the priorities for the Galil redesign was to cut down on weight. The solution was polymer. A lot of it. In fact, the entire lower receiver was constructed of polymer, as well as the furniture of this new rifle. This resulted in a reduction of weight to 7.5 pounds, significantly lighter than the older Galils. Other than lighter weight, there were a number of other changes this new Galil implemented. Rails along the top of the rifle and on the handguard ensured that there was plenty of space for attachments and optics. Something akin to a buffer tube on an AR-15 was also added, providing similar adjustability, though it isn't actually compatible with AR-15 stocks. One of the most forward-thinking features of the original Galil was the controls. The Galil had both a right-hand selector that functioned like an AK selector and a thumb safety selector on the left side of the rifle on the grip. The new Galil retained the dual choice of safety. For the 5.56 version specifically of the updated Galil, there were 3 features that were almost certainly heavily inspired by the AR-15 platform. It took common AR-15 mags, used a mag release very similar to the AR-15's, and had a bolt hold open, just like on an AR-15. These are significant departures from the AK-inspired controls on the original Galil, but frankly, make the gun much easier to use. And one of the best features of this new rifle, the charging handle was moved from the right to left-hand side. For a right-handed shooter, this makes the charging handle much easier to operate. While not groundbreaking, this new Galil was exactly what was needed. A modernized refresh of the weapon, ready to accept all the new firearm accessories that would come in the 21st century. And so, the Galil Ace was born. Though the Galil Ace was made by an Israeli firearms company, the rifle was never meant for the IDF, as they were seeing great success with American-supplied M16s and M4s. Some Galil Aces did make it into the hands of special troopers, but by and large, the weapon never saw widespread use in the IDF. Instead, the Galil Ace was intended to be an export, primarily aimed at countries who still used the AK but were looking for an upgrade, because in almost every way, the Galil Ace is an improvement on the Kalashnikov platform. The Galil Ace has seen use by a number of militaries around the world. Countries such as the Philippines, Mexico, and Chile have all adopted the Galil Ace in varying capacities. And in addition to exporting the weapon, IMI also provides the license to manufacture the Galil Ace. Countries like Ukraine, Vietnam, and Colombia all have produced domestic versions of the rifle. Generally, feedback has been positive on the Galil Ace. The modern features are certainly a huge benefit, especially for militaries who had been using aging AKs. It's interesting to note that the Russian attempts to modernize their AKs have yielded mixed results at best. Yet the Galil Ace seems to have successfully achieved what the AK-12 and AK-15 have not been able to. Additionally, the rifle was, and continues to be, a big hit in the civilian market. After all, it is in effect a modernized AK out of the box. The updated controls means that the Galil does well in shooting competitions and can accommodate all the new accessories that come to market. Galil Aces are also much easier to suppress compared to most AKs available on the commercial market. However, despite the overall positive feedback on the Galil Ace, it seems to be a weapon that's forgotten by popular media. The question is why? A futuristic look, tangible benefits, yet reminiscent of the legendary Kalashnikov. The Galil Ace should be a darling of video games. But it isn't. Compared to many other firearms, the Galil Ace isn't in much fictional media at all. Perhaps one of the reasons for this is the number of countries that issue the Galil Ace. While there are a good number of countries using the weapon, it pales in comparison to more common rifles. The Galil Ace occupies an odd spot in the market. Countries that can afford the weapon usually go with another choice, while other countries that probably could have used the upgrade end up sticking with the AK platform. This leaves only a few countries in which the purchase of the Galil Ace makes sense. So just as it appears to be appealing to a limited number of customers in the real world, it may be the case that it doesn't make sense for many games to include the Galil Ace. Compared to a weapon like the AK, the Galil Ace just isn't as prevalent in the real world. Ubiquity in real life absolutely has an impact on what guns are depicted in fiction. Just look at how many iconic AKs or AR-15s there are. And speaking of the AK, it might be the case that for many games, the AK makes more sense to include compared to the Galil Ace. Whether depicting a real military or a post-apocalyptic world, the AK usually makes sense to include thematically. To give an example, It would make very little sense in Escape from Tarkov to include the Galil Ace as one of its main weapons. In games that do include the Galil Ace, it's often a high-level unlock. Available in the endgame, it's usually depicted as a better version of the AK, just like its real creators intended. The recoil is typically lower, the reload is faster, and mag capacity is higher depending on the variant depicted. For that reason, in the few games where the Galil Ace is featured, it's usually one of the better options for players. It's also interesting that the Galil Ace in real life comes in a multitude of calibers. In games, this is represented by having the Galil take on a variety of roles, whether as its micro variant for CQB, or its longer 308 counterpart filling a DMR role. The Galil Ace in games is just as versatile as the real thing. Born to be a performer in both the real and virtual world, yet regulated to the sidelines, the Galil Ace remains an underappreciated gem of modern firearms and video games. Innovation comes with a promise to be better. And while many products of innovation have fallen short of their promise, the Galil Ace is not one of them. But despite its demonstrable improvements, the Galil Ace nevertheless suffers from being a great product for a somewhat niche market. A better Kalashnikov is something only a handful of countries desire, and the ones that do are more likely to stick with the AK itself. Perhaps in the future, we'll see a greater demand for the Galil Ace, but for now, it remains a forgotten rifle whose achievements are recognized by a select few. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to check out my previous video on the AEK 971. I've also started a second channel where I talk about airsoft, guns, and gear. If you're interested, check it out.